Gentlemen, as directors of the Greyhound Board, I'm putting kind of putting you under a little bit of scrutiny here. Would it be fair to say that the way the board operates, is quite biased in favour of the tracks? And I'm thinking particularly in terms of injuries. Now, we have a situation where if something goes wrong with the trainer, they're not doing something, the stipendiary stewards are on them straight away. You know, these regulations, you have to comply, you have to comply. If we have in theoretically a race meeting where, let's say, you had 4 broken hocks at the same meeting, shouldn't there be an automatic mechanism that the Greyhound Board should be called in to look at that situation and explain, or to basically review the situation and find out what the problem is?
For me, I think the idea of the GB being a regulator sounds all well and good, but I think if you're going to be a regulator, you've got to be a regulator of all the sport, and you've got to see all the sport as one, not regulate somebody far harder than you regulate another area of it. And you know, we've got to realise one side of this sector of the sport has got more of an impact on welfare injuries to the dogs and to the sport than the other side. So, you know, if trainers are regulated as strongly as what they are, you know, we need to regulate the other side as well. And that means having the same strength as what you have with trainers for me.
Ian, I was going to say, I think you've got currently quite a difficult situation of your own, haven't you?
Yeah, we had a pup yesterday at Monmore who broke his hock in his second grading trial. So that's another career-ending injury, and he'll never actually get to race. And so, of course, emotions were running quite high yesterday, and I was contacting various people at the track. What's the position with injury statistics and so on? Is it safe? And one of the things that motivated me most was I have owners within my syndicates who have come to me and said, is it safe? Is it safe to run at Monmore? And the answer I've had to give them is, I don't know, which isn't really very satisfactory, but I honestly don't, because the statistics as to what's going on in an individual track aren't available. As things stand, the GBGB record them, group them together, release them as we're required to do globally, and not from track to track. I personally think, and I think Pete agrees with me on this, that the statistics ought to be released from track to track so that we as an owner and as a trainer can make an informed decision as to whether it's reasonable for us, for our co-owners, to run a dog at a particular place or not. I can't see what valid objection there can be to doing that. I imagine it will be said, well, if you do that, you can go down the road of publishing statistics about trainers. Is this trainer safer than this other trainer? Is there a way they're training or not training their dogs that makes them more susceptible to injury? Again, Peter and I have discussed this, and I think he would also be agreeable to these statistics being published by trainer. So you can actually see who the stronger and weaker trainers are, who the stronger and weaker tracks are. Because at the moment, the stronger tracks, in terms of having less injuries, appear to be paying the price for the weaker tracks who have more. And we ought to know who they are. We ought to be able to see so that we can all make informed decisions. I don't think there's any other avenue in life when we would be taking the decisions that we take with animals without being able to ascertain the facts before we do so. And at the moment, we're not being allowed to do that. You say, should the GBGB be doing something more about this? Well, we're going to take this to the next meeting. Peter and I are going to see whether this can be discussed. Obviously, as a board, we work under a thing called the Chatham House rule. That means that we can talk about what was discussed, but we can't say who said what. And that's quite important because it enables freedom of discussion without fear of subsequently brought to task over it. So it's all right for me to say we're going to discuss this. I obviously won't subsequently be able to say what anybody's view on it are, but we both very much think the statistics need to be broken down from track to track, and if necessary, from trainer to trainer, so we all know where we stand.
I wanted to make this point because I think it's very, very important. And there's no point in, there's no stage would I ever want this to be an anti-promoter kind of discourse. There's too much of it on social media, and some of it is absolutely ridiculous. Some of the people they want to join all promoters together and have them all flogged. My point about it is that, you know, we have some tracks who are clearly trying very, very hard, and they themselves are covering up for those who don't try as hard. I mean, it happens with training as well. You know, that nobody wants to criticize the trainers, but you've got some who go the extra mile for their dogs and some that don't, and they know who they are. The trainers know who they are, and it's the same case with the tracks. Now, it is one of those strange things that in all my time, and I hear an awful lot of things that I can't ever report, because if I do, then people will know where they've come from and it's breaching the confidence. I can honestly say I have never, ever come across the injury statistics for the tracks. So I haven't got the faintest clue who are the good ones and the bad ones. And any comments that I'm making are not aimed at any particular track. The other point I think you raised, Ian, which I think is very, very relevant. We have some tracks that appear to be even operating higher standards in terms of the reporting of injuries, and they could be at a disadvantage, could they not?
Yeah, this has been argued to me, and argued very persuasively, that not all the tracks are going to be happy to release this individual data if they're not entirely convinced that all the other tracks are accurately reporting what's going on. And I think for this system to work, if it's allowed to work, we're going to have to come up with a way whereby statistics are independently reported, whether that's through the vets, whether that's through the regulatory vets when they come on board, I'm not sure. But we clearly can't just rely on the tracks to come up with unverifiable figures, which they could, I'm not saying they are, but they could manipulate to serve a current purpose. These are going to have to be independently verifiable statistics. And if we could achieve that, that should satisfy me as an owner, because I can look at them with confidence. It should satisfy the track promoters, because they can look at them with confidence without thinking that somebody is resorting to skullduggery to cover up their inadequacies. And I think we could then refer to them in totality when we're looking at where the strengths and the weaknesses are. And I've said this many times, we cannot be demonizing any of the groups of stakeholders within the industry, because the industry collapses as soon as one of those stakeholders is removed. We have to have the off-course betting firms because they fund it. We have to have the promoters because we need tracks for the dogs to run at. We have to have trainers to train those dogs. And we definitely have to have owners to own as many of them as are possible. And we can't demonize any one section or the whole house of cards will collapse.
Would you not say, and I realize it's kind of the elephant in the room, but you have a welfare committee. I presume you're on it, are you, Peter?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Okay, so talk to me about welfare. How do you have a welfare committee looking at injuries and not looking at the primary source, which is going to be, I think we can all agree, amongst all the other factors, genetics and feeding and training and everything else, track surfaces has to be right up there. Can we not agree that should be the first thing that the welfare committee should be addressing and breaking down? Get that right, then start to move them on to, as you said, Ian, talk about the trainers. Which trainers aren't getting dogs back from injury? Which ones are getting a greater percentage of injuries than they should do? Because over time, the figures will tell a story, surely.
And this has been a real bugbear of mine regarding the injury recovery scheme when the funding and the budget was put in for this. And I really tried to make a strong case that we should be match funding for prevention. And part of that prevention would be to look at these figures, study the injury report data and break it down, look to see if there's genetics involved, if there's trainers involved, and look what the tracks are involved. And breaking that down will do more for welfare than anything else could ever do. If you don't look at these injuries and work out why they're happening, where they're coming from, what we do to prevent it. I don't want to see dogs repaired. I want to see dogs walking around safe and sound in the first place. That is the greatest welfare. It's not saving the dogs after they've been injured, it's stopping the dogs being injured. And if you look in any walk of life, you know, we have speed limits on roads to stop there being crashes. We don't put a package together to support people who've been in a crash because we've had no speed limits. We go and try and prevent. Prevention is always better than, you know, repairing. So we need to do more, and that is looking at these figures. And if we're not going to show these figures, I've never seen the figures. I don't know, same as Ian, where's safe or where's not safe. You know, I listen to people. You always hear reports of where people are getting injuries, and you make your own informed choices from what you hear. But we don't know true facts. You know I like running a toaster and I feel safe at toaster. I don't think I've had a dog run anywhere else this year. That's because I know I'm safe where I am. And that's wrong. You know, we should be feeling safe wherever we go or know where we can go. And if somewhere isn't safe, what it does then, it pushes them to get themselves safe, because people won't turn up. And, you know, it shouldn't be a case of, well, I'm going to hide everything because I don't want people to know my figures aren't very good, or I'm not. Let's not really demonise anybody. Let's work with everybody and try and make the best for all of us.
That's again going back to the point I made earlier, but you're re-emphasising it. This isn't a witch hunt for promoters. They, in my experience, they do not want injuries. They don't want injuries any more than the rest of us. And given the welfare implications, even less so, because even if we're going to be completely cynical, injuries are bad for tracks. Commercially, they are bad for tracks. So why wouldn't the promoters themselves be pushing this agenda and saying to the welfare, saying to GBGB, which is surely their job, for God's sake, tell us where we're going wrong or which of us are going wrong. And even amongst ourselves, we can start to say, well, okay, we have certain tracks that need serious work. We might even have certain tracks where we say, well, you know, we can only run over certain distances. Maybe we can only have stayers races at certain tracks. Everybody would naturally think, oh, it's going to be the small ones, but it may not be. I think, you know, Ian races at Entain tracks. One of the things about Entain is that their records are probably the most accurate of any of the tracks. They follow everything. So they would be, you know, some of the people to perhaps benefit if the statistics were available for everybody else, which is what you're referring to, Ian.
I'm sure they would. It's not that long ago that we had what appeared to be a spate of hock injuries at Monmore. And as a board, we arranged for Dr. Spring and Mark Peacock, the track liaison officer, to go to inspect, to carry out their various measurements, which they did, and they could find nothing actually wrong. I don't think we've ever been in a stronger position when it comes to sending people out to do those measurements. It's a sad fact that this time of year, we're in the middle of hock season. I know, Floyd, some time ago, you published statistics that go back 30, 40, or even further to say that it happens at this time every year. And the only conceivable reason for that is there's not enough water on the tracks. You'd be surprised how much of it evaporates before it can even be put down. It's evaporating out of the sand throughout the entire process. We just can't get the sand wet enough. And we've got to make more effort to try and find a scientific way around that. We are. STRI are experimenting with all sorts of different chemicals, the purpose of which is to help the water molecules bond better with the sand molecules so that the water doesn't evaporate, so that it doesn't go straight through and out of the drains, so it actually stays there longer. So that is research that is ongoing. That's something I think we've got to put more effort into, because clearly at the moment we need a Bowser every race to get and keep enough water on the surfaces. Tracks like Monmore are doing that well. They're doing a lot of it. And I agree with you. I don't understand why they don't want their statistics to be shown, because they're probably on the right side of safe. But I do understand they have concerns that everybody should be obliged to calculate their statistics in the same way. So we're going to go away and we're going to suggest this at the next board meeting, and we'll see what comes of it.
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember when the Greyhound board was first set up, and I believe that Lord Donoghu wanted the tracks to individually report their injury data, and I think John Curran was actively involved on behalf of the promoters at the time, and I believe that the injury data was, to use the political parlance, a non-negotiable at the time. However, that was 20 odd years ago, and the world has moved on and welfare has moved on significantly. Should tracks even have that option? Because as I said, when it comes to anything else, when it comes to owners having to submit, water bills and whatever to prove who they are, so that they can't get out of homing their dogs correctly, or trainers with wrong bed sizes, or whatever the case may be, there is still that element in terms of tracks that would not appear to be as strict. But see, that's the perception. Maybe it is. Maybe, someone from the Greyhound board would come out and go, "That's a complete myth. We are just as tough on the tracks as we are on the trainers." I just don't see it.
Can I just jump in there where you've just made a point there? Who owns this data? Any data on trainers, who's had more dogs put down than somebody else, who has more injuries with trainers, etc. That is all owned by the GB. Guess who owns the data when it comes back from tracks with track injury data, etc.? Who owns that?
The racecourse promoters.
The GB have no control over what the tracks are doing, or how, if you're a regulator, can you have control over one sector of the sport like trainers? Everything the trainers do, any data attached to the trainers, the GB own it all. Why don't us as trainers own our own data? Why, when the GTA was involved, was it not theirs? But no, all ours is owned by the GB. Anything to do with the tracks, all owned by the tracks. So when I hear this point that we're all in it together, well, we all ought to be in it together. So let's all have the same status.
Yeah, definitely. So as I said, this isn't anti-track. If for those who are doing their job well, they can only come well out of this. Those who are putting the money in and the investment in and paying for the staff and the equipment and making sure the job's done correctly, they have to gain from this. This is no way. And as I said, I get very, very irritated with some of the absolute crap that's on social media. Every time a dog gets injured, it's, oh, well, the track don't care, or the racing manager doesn't care. Not in my experience, and I've been in the industry long enough.
No, I agree with you on that. Now, picking a point up with Ian, where he's saying about SDI looking to try and get the sand for the water molecules, etc. A big point for me is one of the biggest issues is the bowser going round. Kevin is very, very hot on hand watering and trying to get the amount of water on with hand, because the bowser, it's a massive lump of weight which is compact in certain areas. So you hear the tracks loosening tracks, the ground up and then laying it back down again. As soon as the bowser going on, it's compacting in certain areas. I am pushing that we should be looking to universities for some of their graduates who are looking to do, their piece, engineering graduates. How do we get the water on without that bowser? That bowser is causing damage to them tracks. How do we get the water on? We haven't got the specialists to do that. So we need to go out there and look for talent that can show us a way of getting on that water on there without the bowser. They don't do it on horse tracks, and the horses are a lot bigger unit than what our greyhounds are with their bone structure, etc. And they don't put bowsers around the track. They've got a watering system that the weight's not going on the track. We're whacking all that weight on. We've got to find a way very quickly to get that water on. How much we need in the time what we need it without that weight.
I absolutely, and again, Peter, some of this research has been done. I mean, if you go back, look to the SDRI archives, they looked at the areas, they did all their testing, that's 15, 20 years ago, I can't even remember, where they measured how hard the track was compacted in certain sections. In front of the starting traps, or in fact behind the starting traps, was a bad area, and that was a bad area for injuries. And of course, particularly again when you get the six bend races, where you've got that hard area off that second bend, depending on how far back the traps are. They discovered all this stuff then. I mean, personally, we know that the watering systems are limited. Again, I've mentioned this previously. Gordon Bissett, all the work he did, he said that they don't work because the wind affects things and you end up with big puddles in certain areas. I am yet to see a system better than hand watering. And the problem with it is that it has to be done. And you virtually through the summer, you virtually have to hand water every single day, even when you're not racing, just to keep the moisture in the surface. Because if you flood a track, the water just runs across it.
It's very labour intensive, Floyd. It's very, very labour intensive, and it's a cost on there. But you've got to realise there's a cost to all of us with welfare of not doing it. And you know, because the cost isn't being borne by all within the sport at this point in time, they can, you know, people aren't pushing to hand water. Years ago, when we had Long Eaton Stadium, we never bowsed at all. My dad would used to be going there at 11 o'clock at night, putting the sprinklers on. Even though it was a grass track, he'd be sprinklers on, and he would be hand watering. It was just solely hand watering. Even in them days, it was hand watering with my little old father, hand watering the tracks. He would turn his gravy feast all these bows on these tracks.
But how do you justify, you know, we're talking about costs, how do you justify even someone like £10 an hour or whatever? And some of this stuff doesn't require a massive amount of it doesn't require the groundsman to be out there at 9 o'clock at night. I'm sure there are casual staff that could do it, paying £15 an hour. You do that, give them 2 or 3 hours work every night throughout the summer. What's the cost compared to a broken hock, the veterinary cost and everything else?
You justify it through this data, what we were just talking about. You go through this data, you can prove that is it the bowser, what is causing it, and you can prove anything if you use that data, and we're allowed to use that data, and that's not what's being done, and that's what we need to do.
There were two hocks at Monmore yesterday. That will cost them getting on for £2,000 in vet bills. If they were to spend half of that on preventative issues rather than dealing with the problems after the event, they actually have quite a lot of money available to do something serious about this that will save them money in the long run. Recently, I went to Romford, Crayford and Hove, and one of the things I did was deliberately do a track walk and to see how they get the water onto the track. And we've had a long chat about various watering systems and sprinklers. I did the same thing, Aaron, when I was visiting the tracks in Ireland. All of these tracks have sprinkler systems, and all of them have given up on them because they don't work because of the effect of wind. You get some areas which are inundated with water and some areas where there's no water at all. We know that doesn't work. We know the Bowser doesn't work very well because of the weight issues. We have absolutely got to find something else. And allocating some of the money that they're currently allocating to deal with these serious injuries should be enough to actually find a better way of doing it. Whether it's some mechanism that runs around the inside, opens in between the light stanchions and closes, I don't know, but there's got to be a way. And as Pete says, why not get some of the engineering students onto this? They could even be paid to a certain extent, either for their research time or for the better theories. We could have a competition even, but something. There's got to be a way in this day and age of finding a better way of watering the sand than we have at the moment.
It's not just that, Ian. You know, commercially, if you found somebody who came up with something which would water the track, it's not just England, it's Ireland, it's Australia. There's major areas which have got ground racing, which have got this problem. You patent it and you sell it. You know, there's a commercial aspect there for somebody to come up with this idea. You know, I haven't got the skills to do it. There's people out there who have got the skills and we're not tapping into them. And you know, you say the £2,000 for the hock injuries, there's a massive more cost burden attached to that with the person who's then looking after that dog until you can find a home. And we're going to go into a crisis soon where there's more retired dogs in trainers' kennels than what we're going to have spaces for. We're not going to have spaces for runners soon. So that £2,000 is going to be insignificant to what the cost is going to be to the sport with these dogs being in trainers' kennels, because who wants to rehome dogs which have got problems with old injuries? You know, this is coming around the corner to us. I've never had so many dogs in my life, Floyd, with retired dogs. I think I'm probably 12 or 14 dogs there, which are retired, waiting to go into homes. You know, it's getting a massive burden to trainers and owners now. You know, an owner can't buy a new dog if they're still paying for another one in a trainer's kennel. You know, these injured dogs, really is the market out there for injured dogs going out there to be pets. People don't want to have a dog what's hobbling around or got to go to the vets all the time to have medication. You know, it's going to be a massive hit to this industry if we're going to have all these dogs which are retired in kennels. You know, there's a bigger issue at the moment. We've got the Ukraine dogs all coming over. You know, the Irish are sending dogs over to England, retired dogs. You know, there's not enough homes for all these dogs out there at this point in time, and you know, we need to keep dogs running longer so we don't need so many coming in the sport. If dogs are getting injured, they're going out of the sport. We need new ones coming in. We need to cut down the injuries, and that cuts down the retireds.
Ian?
Yeah, I've had many calls from owner trainers over the last few weeks who are getting into financial difficulties because for one reason or another, they own a lot of the dogs in their kennels. Those dogs need to be retired. They can't get them out into homes. Therefore, they can't bring in new dogs to run to occupy those kennel spaces. And they're producing no income for the trainers who are really in financial difficulties. And this is very much an issue that somehow or other we've got to address. We've got to be able to find more homes for retired greyhounds. And as Peter rightly says, when we're getting ones like mine from yesterday that didn't even get to its racing career before it had a career-ending injury, that's another one that's going to join the retired statistics. And if we can find a way of avoiding those injuries at the very least, it can only help what is clearly a time bomb that's just around the corner and waiting to explode.